Hey everybody. If you're like me, been watching Bob Lazar give interviews lately on recent podcasts. I remember hearing Bob Lazar for the first time when he told his story on the Art Bell show in the 1990s. It was fascinating then, and it's fascinating now. On a recent podcast, they mentioned going to Google Earth and taking a look for ourselves of some of the roads and tracks on the Papoose Lakebed and the possible location of where the S4 facility was. I've done that, and I have found some interesting things. Let me show you what I found. I want to take you down the road that Bob Lazar took around Papoose Mountain and south to the Papoose Lakebed and finally to the S4 facility. But before I do that, let's take a look at some of the distances that are involved here. And this is Groom Lake, a dry lake bed. And this is Area 51. Down to the lower left is Papoose Mountain, but it's quite a distance. Let's use the distance calculator just to get an idea. Across Groom Lake from east to west, it's 2.8 miles. That's a long way. And from north to south, if we draw a quick line, it's 3.5 miles. So this runway is a long runway. I've worked on Air Force bases for 10 years as a military member. I did not work on this Air Force base. Then I worked as a government contractor afterwards. But I was never at Area 51. Now, if we take the road that Bob Lazar would have gotten off of his aircraft, let's say at one of these aircraft that you see the stairs coming down, or something similar. Yes, I know it was in the 1980s, and we're looking at it today, but still, it would be something like this. He would get on a bus, and he would take the bus through Area 51 to this road right here. So let's take this road and make our way towards the Papoose Lakebed and S4. We're going to take this road towards S4, much like Bob Lazar would have done, in the bus with the blacked out windows and Dennis Mariani and the security personnel. If we rotate the camera, we can see that this is the Papoose mountain range. This used to be a mine, or there used to be a silver and lead mine in the Papoose mountain range, just like there was in the Groom mountain range over there. This was before the Air Force Base was built. So many of these roads that you might see going off towards the mountain may have originally been mining roads into the mountain. One can also imagine that if you're going to build an underground facility, you might take advantage of some of the underground mines and tunnels already in place. So we'll travel down the road that the blacked out windows of the school bus would have taken. You see there is a branch here to go to a smaller road. I'm going to call all of these roads, no matter what size they are, but we're going to stay on the main road at this point. And you'll see there are several smaller pathways and roads that branch off and lead up to the mountain. But we're not going that way. We're going to stay on this and follow the track of Bob Lazar. And we see the Papoose mountain range to our left. And here's another intersection. This intersection is the road that heads to the Papoose Lakebed. We travel down this road and we go to the left. I'm going to move the map just a little bit so you can see some of the Papoose mountain range to our left that he would have seen as he traveled down. On this road, you'll see there are several little turnouts that a large truck or vehicle could park to the side if there is oncoming traffic that wouldn't fit. There are 3 such turnouts on this road. Now, this was probably a road originally built for mining activity in the 1930s, but it's interesting to see that you could get large vehicles down this and they could use the turnouts if they needed to. Here, we're continuing our way south-southwest, and you'll see there's a parallel road here and the main road here. I would imagine that this is an older road on the right that's just not used much anymore. But we do see small intersections. I'm going to turn the camera so you can see this line. This is an old trackway. We're going to call it a road, even though it looks like it hasn't been used very often. And the map that we're using, the satellite map, is the most current one available. If you switch to other years, sometimes these tracks become more visible, not less visible. But we're going to stay on the current one for now and continue our way south toward Papoose Lakebed. We get to this interesting intersection as well. If you go to the left, this road goes up to Papoose Mountain as if it was a mining road. And there's a strange circular road or circular shape of road here and some white buildings. I'm going to scroll out really quick and take this road just to show you that it goes up to the mountain and almost to the top, but it terminates into the mountain at about this location. You can see the tracks of the vehicle there. Probably a mining road of some kind. You'll notice there is a facility on top of Papoose Mountain right here on another road. So we go back to the main road. You'll see that there's a road that goes this direction towards the mountain and has another intersection, and that goes up to the top of the mountain with that facility. If we continue with the main road, there are other intersections where there are smaller roads going off, some interesting formations and unusual lines for whatever purpose they're serving. And we continue on. We come to another important intersection on our journey to S4. If you go left, you'll see there's a large turnaround right here, maybe for large vehicles to load or unload or to turn around. And then the road continues up the mountain. This is the road that takes you to the very top of Papoose Mountain. And I'm going to follow that course, and you'll see there's interesting facilities at the very top of the mountain. I'm going to scroll in as much as I can to give you an idea. There's some smaller buildings here and a ridge of some kind. Maybe it's an observation post, maybe it's a security post. I'm sure there's some good reason for these being here, and it overlooks Groom Lake, which you see in the distance. It's a nice way to get a good view of the area from all sides, but just wanted to show you that that is on top of Papoose Mountain. So let's head back to the main road on the way south to Papoose Lake. We've seen the peak of the mountain, so we continue south in the same direction and probably the same road that Bob Lazar took in the 1980s on his way to the S4 facility. It's quite a distance, actually. He did say, if I recall correctly, that it was a 15 to 30 minute ride in the bus, and he said he could see the mountains on his left, which we can see, but not much else, because there just isn't much else. There's another road intersection here that goes off to our right, and we're going to continue going south. You can see the road is clearly visible from this angle and from this satellite picture. I've watched a critical video recently on the Bob Lazar story because I haven't 100% made up my mind, although I think he's very convincing, and I think the story is probably accurate. But I wasn't there myself, and I don't see a facility there today, so it's hard to be 100% certain. But one of the critics said there just weren't any roads or facilities in this area at all, and that's obviously not true. There are. I don't know what the state was in the 1980s, but we can see today that there are several service roads in this area branching off in several directions. Some are more used than others, but clearly this one to the south was a well-used road, or at least it was well used at one time, that it is still readily visible to us today. We're approaching Papoose Lake now, and we're going to follow the winding road. They could probably have driven on the desert itself. You can see, if you look carefully, there's some parallel tracks here from maybe the road used to go that direction, or maybe you would take this if there was an oncoming vehicle and you could go off to the side. I'm sure that most vehicles, trucks and things could drive onto the desert floor without too much problem, but there is a road that makes it a little bit easier. We're going to run into that problem, into that issue, when we go on to Papoose Lakebed itself. Okay, I have a label here called Old Intersection, because I watched the podcast with Jesse Michaels and the interview, and they had shown an old miner's map or a geological survey map, which showed a road here that goes in the direction of S4. I want you to look in the distance there. See those 3 or 4 small mountain peaks? That is where Bob Lazar indicated was the facility at S4 on this last mountain peak here where you see all my green pins. Those are elevation pins. I was figuring out how tall that area really was. You'll notice this road, this small, hard to see one, looks older and unused, used to go towards the left, towards the S4 facility. And then the road that exists now goes to the right. And you'll see my pin. I have 2007 to 2020. I put that there because that tells me which map to use to see this road even better. So here on Google Earth, you can show the historical imagery, which I'll do so now. And you see the slider bar at the top. We're looking at what I think is the most recent satellite photo. But I'm going to change it to one of these years that I've indicated because you can see this road better. There, I've clicked 2020, and now you can see this old road shows up just a little bit better if I clicked the 2020 version. In fact, I can go all the way back to 2007, and you can see the road just like that. Quite well. It's very distinct. It just doesn't look like it's been used very frequently. And that's what we're going to find. The question in my mind often is, when were these roads last used? How frequently were they used? And if S4 was a facility in the 1980s, you can imagine there'd be a fair amount of traffic coming to and from that location. But you must remember, this is not the only road to S4, if S4 was indeed there. This was probably the original road, and then today in modern times, they use this one to go to the right on Papoose Lakebed. But I'm going to scroll out for a minute and show you the broader picture of Papoose Lakebed before we get into looking at some of the tire tracks on the current dry lakebed of Papoose Lake. Now, we're looking from above, with north being at the top of the map. Before, we were traveling down the road towards Papoose Lakebed, and we came to this, what I call the old intersection of the road that goes slightly to the east, and it heads in the direction of S4, or where the S4 facility most likely was. You'll also notice that the original road follows a straight line as if the old road was the original direction because it continues on straight, where the road that seems to be most used curves off to the west. Before we get into the dry lakebed itself, I'm going to scroll out a little bit. I have a red pin here called Road Lakebed North Entrance and Exit, where you would enter and exit onto the dry lakebed itself. I wanted to find out what sort of roads went onto the dry lakebed itself. You can see lots of tire tracks on the dry lakebed, but how many roads were there to the S4 facility? For the sake of the video, that it was here, located on this mountain, which is at the end of the Papoose Range, where you see these green elevation markers, specifically this area right here. But I'm going to scroll out a little bit. You know you're looking at Papoose Lakebed when you see this distinctive formation in the dry lakebed. And at the end of that is the first hill you come to is where Bob Lazar says was the S4 facility, right at the end of this interesting little spit of land. But I'm going to scroll out. I want to show you there are several roads that go into Papoose Dry Lakebed. Here is one that comes from the south, and I put a red marker where it enters the dry lakebed. Here is one that is on the west side of the lake, and it enters the dry lakebed there. I'm going to scroll in a little bit. Notice how you can't see much of the tracks from this road onto the dry lakebed, but that's because we're looking at this particular satellite photo. I'm going to switch to 2024, and wow, what a difference. Look at all the tracks on the west side of Papoose Lakebed. Both north and south of this entrance, there are many tracks. I don't know how old they are or when they were formed, but what you can say is there has been some decent traffic in this way, in this area. You'll also notice this road has tracks going to the north, to the south, and then look at this track right here. There's a couple of tracks that go to the northwest. That is towards S4. See those green markers? This track here goes straight towards that direction, and you can see another track, if you look at my mouse, faintly visible on the dry lakebed itself, heading directly towards the S4 location. Some of these tracks go straight east. As you can see, there's quite a bit of wear straight east, and that is because straight east is another road. Here we are in the center of Papoose Lakebed. This road, I'll call it a road now because we can see it again, cuts straight across the center area where you see all the other tracks, but a heavily trafficked or rutted road through the middle, and converges over here on the east entrance. There's actually two east entrances on the Papoose Lakebed. And you see all kinds of tire tracks. I'm going to call them tire tracks while we're on the dry lake bed itself, coming off of this road. Some of them going straight west towards the other exit off of the lake. Some turning south. As you can see, there's many north-south tracks on the dry lake bed. And heading north. And look at all these tracks heading north. North is the S4 facility. There's two entrances on the east side of Papoose Lakebed. There's this one, a little bit to the south, and then there's this one as well. There's another road in this direction that you can see that goes onto the dry lake bed. And here you see all the tracks from vehicles. Some are headed south, some are headed southwest, and some are headed north and northwest. Here's a bunch more tracks all over the dry lake bed. And just north was supposed to be the S4 facility. There are many tracks going in those directions. We're going to take a look at a few of those tracks next, but I just wanted to go over where the 5 entrances are onto Papoose Lakebed. You can see some more tire tracks. I'm zoomed into Papoose Lakebed at a random location, and I just see many, many tire tracks going in various directions. If you move left and to the right, you'll see more tire tracks. They're just all over Papoose Lake. You don't see it on every satellite photo, but if you scroll throughout the years, some of them you will see. Like these tracks here, if I clicked over to 2007, they won't show at all. But the recent satellite photos certainly do show the tracks. I'm going to scroll out, and there I was in the middle of Papoose Lakebed. Let's look at a few more of the tracks. Notice the collection of tracks. There's many tracks on the north side of Papoose Lakebed, many tracks on the east side of Papoose Lakebed, near where the S4 facility was, tracks in the middle, and then tracks along the southwest. There are probably other tracks as well that I just didn't notice or didn't mark. The tracks are heavily concentrated around the entranceways and exits that I showed you here, like this one, which you see the tracks going west. On this little area of the lakebed, which seems to be not as flat as the others, the tracks are often much more noticeable, as you can see. What I'd like to do is propose that the road to S4 was not only from the north, and this is the way we came down when we first started. You'll notice there are other roads, 2 more roads on the east side, and 1 on the west, and then 1 from the south. That materials could have been transported across these roads and up to S4. If it was an underground facility, you could have had materials and excavation work being done through other accesses to the underground facility, because there are roads all over Papoose Mountain that sometimes end nowhere, and the road on the mountain just comes to an end, like this one here. But anyway, back to the tracks, which I find interesting. I don't know how current or if these tracks are new or they're old, but there's a lot of them. So let's say we have tracks, like we're going to follow these tracks going north and south, as if someone had pulled onto the lakebed here and taken a right, and some of these tracks do show a right-hand turn. As we're heading north, you can see a large number of north-south tracks right here, which head towards S4 and also the north part of the lake. Just because we see a track heading north here does not mean it's going to the S4 facility. It could just be heading all the way to the north side of the lake. Here's another where I put a marker saying many tire tracks north and south. There's more tire tracks right here. It looks like some people prefer to drive on the edge of the dry lake. Some people drove in the middle of the dry lake. And the tracks are not always preserved. Here you can see a tire track, for example, where we see the tracks are preserved here, but not here. And then they are preserved again at this location. I would imagine that a dry lake bed is most of the time very hard and doesn't leave tracks. But now and then, if the area receives rain, I mean, it is a desert after all, so they don't get much rain, but when they do, the dry lake bed probably softens. And then you might get tracks and ruts now and then. There was one satellite photograph that showed some water actually on the dry lake bed in this region right up here. This part here, you can actually see some of the shading that looks like it got water water accumulates here before it accumulates in the other parts of the dry lake bed during a rare period of rain. So we don't see many ruts or roads going through this area. And I think it's because this is the wetter part of the dry lake bed of when it gets rain. I think to go to S4, they would have traveled right along the edge or along this, or you would go on the dry lake bed a little bit to the west and drive around and then land to avoid any possible moisture in this part of the dry lake bed. At least from the satellite photo I looked at, this was wet in one of the satellite photos. But here, the tracks near S4 are the most interesting to me. So if we look on this right side of the lake, or the east side of the lake, these tracks heading north and south go in the direction of S4 as well as the north side of the lake. And again, you see many tracks. You see curved tracks, you see straight tracks, you see tracks going off into the desert, off of the dry lake bed sometimes. Traveling north here, you see people turning to the right and then traveling on. Here's a track that goes into this area. Sometimes I wonder, what if these are contour lines formed by the receding water in times of rare rainwater, and it fills up with water and it leaves little contour lines. I thought that maybe some of these tracks were related to that. But if you look at the tracks, some of these are obviously vehicle tracks and not contour lines. Like this, for example. Here we have one of the east entrance exit roads coming off of the desert. And if you look at the tracks, we know that these tracks are actual vehicle tracks coming from this road. These are not contour lines. It's just obvious. And then these tracks go in a variety of directions. So if you follow that track, for example, you know this track is not a contour line because it lines up with the tracks coming from the road. So I think it's reasonable to assume the vast majority of these tracks are actual tracks and not contour lines. And if we continue our path northward, these tracks continue along the dry lake bed on the right side. Sometimes they get a little blurry, but they're still there. Here we see a track that crosses the desert. It's hard to see on this one. I'm going to switch to a different satellite photo, but you can see the track right here crossing the desert, as if someone was driving and went on the right side and crossed. But it looks like most of the traffic drove around this promontory here, if that's what it's called. And you can see many tire tracks, in this case, going east and west, as if they're driving around that, curving around this way. And here you see many more tire tracks, as if this was a commonly traversed area in vehicles. And we'll follow those tire tracks as you just see many, many tracks. Obviously, these are vehicles, two parallel lines. They're not contours, although it's possible some of them are contour lines, but most of these appear to be vehicle tracks. And here is the S4 facility location. So there's quite a bit of traffic to the south as well as what we traverse to the north. And one more thing before we leave this area, I found an unusual formation. I thought I'd share it with you. If you zoom in right here, which if you're doing it yourself on Google Earth, it's right by the hill where S4 was and this little spit of land. But at the base of it, there appears to be like what looks like a pool of water was accumulating there, and it's dried up now. But there is a circle formation with squares. You can't see it on this satellite map, so we're going to switch. First, let's try 2024. And there it is. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see it. Now look at this circular formation. Appears to be the remnants of a building, perhaps. And then on the left, you have some squarish looking lines. I don't know what this dark diagonal line is, but it looks to be the remains of a man-made structure right there. If we look at a different map, you just can't see it. On these earlier maps, I mean, you can see a little something, but on the 2022, it's not hardly visible, but on the 2024, it's very visible. So for someone to say, there's no evidence of any structures of any kind at S4, this makes me question that. It looks like the evidence of some kind of a structure. I don't know what it is. We're going to raise up a little bit and look at the S4 location from an elevation. I just showed you the strange circular formation there and many of the tracks that are to the south of S4, and we looked at a few of the tracks that are around this dry lake bed area. In fact, here are the tracks to the north of S4. There are many tire track formations of vehicles at some point in time traveling on this road or this dry lake bed. You'll notice if you switch to this different satellite views, some of them are just never visible at all. So you can understand why somebody would say there's no evidence of any traffic at all going to S4. But if you look carefully at recent satellite photos, you certainly do see vehicle tracks, and you see a lot of them. They might just be recent, but the fact is that shows that vehicles do travel here, and they probably traveled in the past in that same location. And it looks to me at some of these places where it looks like erosion marks from water, they use these as natural on-off ramps from their vehicles to get on and off the dry lake bed. You can see more tire tracks here, a great many, in fact, following kind of the shore between the dry lake bed and the desert. And this spot right here, where you see more tire tracks, seems to be a good location to unload employees to S4. Maybe they drove up onto the desert, but right there is the S4 mountain. I'm calling it the S4 mountain. I don't know what the actual name of it is. It's part of the Papoose mountain range, which you see all the way to the left and in front of us. But about right here would be, I think, the end of the line for Bob Lazar traveling in the bus with the blacked out windows to reach the S4 facility. Now, maybe they drove up onto the desert, and at the time, maybe there was a place to park or just stop your bus in the desert and get out and get to the door. The distance from the dry lake bed, where these tire tracks are, to the beginning of this mountain is not insignificant. It's a little bit of a trek. It's 1,200 feet from the edge of the lake to the edge of the mountain. So that's why I think they probably pulled the bus up closer. You could get the bus up anywhere on here. It's just desert land, but we don't know exactly where. Now, you'll notice that we're looking at the exact mountain that was identified in the new documentary by Bob Lazar and the filmmaker as being the location of the S4 facility. Now that we're at S4, my skeptical mind wants to ask, if there was a facility here underground, is there enough room for it? And where was it? Because I looked very carefully, and around this area, of course, I don't see any remains of hangar doors or facilities. But of course, I'm looking at this today in 2026, and if S4 was there and it was moved, maybe it was closed up and covered up, and you just can't see any remains of it at all. They showed a photo that was taken by a pilot from 17 miles away that you could zoom in on, and they said they found some vertical lines that appeared to be hangars, and that was right here. This is Google Earth. It's not the same photo, and that photo was taken quite a while ago. Maybe those were visible then, and they're just not visible now because that's been corrected. I don't know. It could be. If you look at the elevation difference between where the bus might have stopped, which is 1389, to the top of this little first hill, which is 1452. So we're looking at a 63-foot difference in elevation. Is that enough to build an underground facility with hangars? Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but it's possible, I suppose. Maybe S4 was one of these other hills, but he did identify it as this first hill, so we go with that for now. I did find some interesting formations, interesting geological formations, like what looks like horizontal lines between the white and the dark. I'm not sure that means anything, but I did see it there. I also found some interesting right angles that are not easy to see, but facing this way, there's small right angles of light right there and some more here. Now this might just be pareidolia where your mind sees what it wants to see, like the picture of Jesus on a piece of toast. So I wouldn't put any stock in that there's anything here. If I change it to a different satellite map, you don't see anything at all. So maybe you don't even see it now that I'm pointing it out, but still might be something there, but I doubt it. I didn't see any other anomalies. I don't know what these dark stripes are, just a different type of earth at the time. These little dots are probably bushes or brush or stones. I was looking for areas of this small hill that was devoid of stones or brush. Even if there wasn't an outline of a hangar door, maybe you could see that the stones and brush had been cleared away from a certain area, and I don't see that either. Of course, we're looking at it now in 2026, a satellite photo from 2024, so maybe you wouldn't expect to see much of that at all. But at least we can see this is the S4 location, according to Bob Lazar. There are many tire tracks that lead to this all over Papoose Lakebed.